Hi, my name's Blethen from Walkscott, and in this series we've been covering a wide range of look and feel and navigation features. In this particular session, we'll be covering basic personalization. It should be noted that I'm using a standard D365 finance and operations environment with Microsoft's Contoso data. So let's jump right in. Personalizations are used to enhance a user's experience. Now, personalizations can be used to add additional information to a user's session or to also remove and move fields to enhance data entry and navigation within the system. The first example that we're going to cover is how to add fields to a grid. And I'm going to navigate to all customers under accounts receivable, all customers. Now, it should be noted that Microsoft has out-of-the-box standard views. And you can see this, I'm currently in Microsoft's standard view. I can personalize this using just basic personalizations to add fields and also remove unwanted fields. Now, it should be noted, anytime you're making changes, whether it be applying filters or sorting or adding or removing fields, you are personalizing the experience for a user. I'm going to add a field to this grid, and there's two ways you can do it quite quickly. The first way is right-clicking in the grid at the top near the headings, and you can right-click and see that there's insert columns. The other option is in the far right, you'll see three dots, and if I left-click on the grid options, you also have the insert columns option. So I'm going to right-click and insert columns, and I'm going to bring two fields into the grid. I'm going to bring in a hold status so I can see which of these customers are currently active customers. So to do that, I click on the field on the drop down, and under contains, I can type in hold. You can see there's an invoicing and delivery on hold field. I'll click that one. Before I update, I'm actually going to find another field as well, which is credit limit. Now, I'm just going to type in credit, and you'll see that there's a lot of credit related fields. I'm simply going to bring in this field, credit limit. When I'm happy, I can click update. Now, that is going to bring the fields to the to the right. I can move these fields by simply hovering over them, and you'll see four dots that'll bring up a four-way arrow. Now, I'm going to move the credit limit across before customer group, and I'm also going to move invoice and delivery before invoice account. Now, what you'll notice is I also have some fields that have no information in them, and at this point, I'd like to remove them. So with some basic personalizations, we can remove them by simply right-clicking on the column header, and you can see we can hide this column. So again, extension, I right-click, hide this column, is merged, right-click, hide this column. Now, anytime, as I mentioned, that you're applying new filters, new sorting, bringing new fields in, hiding fields, you will get this symbol with the little asterisks. Now, this means I've changed the standard view in some way. Now, if I was to move on to another page, I will lose all of the personalizations that I've currently applied. So to avoid losing those personalizations, I can left-click on the standard view and save as. And we'll be covering views in much more detail. So I can give it a name, credit limit and hold status, and I can click save. You can now see that I've got a different view with credit limit and hold status, and it should be noted that any personalizations that I'm only making to my session. As I mentioned, we will be covering views in a separate session and how you can share those views with other colleagues as well. If I make a mistake, I can always navigate back to the standard view and start from scratch with applying filters, removing fields, and adding fields. but I can also toggle between the standard view, which is currently the default view because it's got a little pin there, and my credit limit and hold status as well that I've just created. Now the next example is how to add a field to a form. So I'm going to drill down into a customer master record, and I'm going to add a field to the form. So I'm currently on the General Fast tab, and I'd like to bring those additional fields that could be lower down in another Fast tab. I'd like to bring them up here in the General Fast tab as well. So what I'm going to do is I can right click on the General Fast tab. You can see it says Personalize Upper Group. I can right click and it'll show you an area where you're going to be doing basic personalization. So at the moment, I'm just going to simply add a field to this upper grid, and I'm going to bring in the hold field again, and I can also bring in that same credit field to the General Fast tab. And when I click Update, you'll see that these two fields now appear on the grid. What you'll notice is there's also some blank fields that may be taking up some space and they may not be used in your organization. So for example, this DUNS number, it's not currently in use. I can simply right click, personalize this DUNS number, and you'll see you get a few more options. Now, what I'm going to do is I'm simply going to hide this field, and I'll explain some of the other options as well. Now, as I mentioned, anytime you're adding or changing, bringing in fields, you see that there's a standard view. Now, it does appear a little bit smaller on some forms, so it's worth noting that anytime you're making personalizations, no matter how small or large, you will have to save these views. The next area that you can see is I've got this credit limit now on the grid, but if I collapse the Fast tab, I don't see that information, and maybe I want to bring it to the attention that even when these Fast tabs are collapsed, I want to be able to see some additional fields. So how you do that is you simply right click on the field, personalize credit limit, and that's where you see the show in header field. So as soon as I click show in header, you'll now see that the credit limit, if you hover over the field, it'll tell you the field is also displayed even when the Fast tab is collapsed. Now the next example that I want to show is, for example, on search name. If I click personalize on search name, we can have fields be marked as required. So some fields in Dynamics are mandatory. This is an option where those mandatory, non-mandatory field or optional fields, you can trigger them to be required for a particular view. So if I was to mark this as required, it means that this search name field would be required when users are using this particular view. Alternatively, if I untick the required or move out and come back to the personalization, you can also skip fields as well. So skipping the field means that when I'm doing data entry and I'm tabbing through various fields, it will skip that field and move on to the next field. So those are some of the basic personalizations that are available when adding fields to a form. Now we can also apply basic personalizations to the action ribbon and menu items within the action ribbon as well. So for example, let's say I don't use commerce at all in my organization. I can simply right click on the entire commerce, personalize, and I can hide that from my session. So again, I can say the same for service. Maybe my organization is not using service. I can personalize and I can hide that entire action ribbon. The same with marketing. Perhaps my organization doesn't use the marketing in finance and operations. I can right click, personalize, and hide marketing. However, under customer, I do need some of these menu items a lot, but perhaps I don't do catalogs. So I can simply right click, personalize catalogs, and I can hide that particular area. You may have certain fields within here that you don't use. So maybe credit cards. I can right click, personalize credit cards, and hide just that particular menu item. So really powerful with your views. You can not only apply these to fields and to fast tabs, you can also apply them to the action ribbon and make a user's experience much simpler if you're not using certain fields and menu items. But one thing to remember again is that if you're making any of those changes, you do need to save as, and I can again call this the simple view. And again, I could pin this as my default view, but for now, I'll leave that as is and click save. So the next time you come into the form, so if I click in all customers, by default, it's going to stay with the standard view. I can now toggle to the credit and hold status if I like. I can toggle back to the standard view, and I can drill down into the customer master record and change from the standard view to my simple view that has a much simpler visual and additional fields as well that we added earlier. We're now going to move on to personalizing workspaces. And there's a few different ways that you can personalize a workspace from queries that you've created in list pages. So in this example, I'm going to add a workspace tile. Now, tiles are really powerful in workspaces, where, for example, I may want my credit limit and hold status. I may want to filter on just those customers that are not on hold and those that have a credit limit, so is not equal to 0. And we'll see a few of these will disappear in the list. And maybe I like a specific customer group. So maybe I want a query that is just for retail customers, which is 30. So as you can see, I've applied a number of filters. This is my active customers with a credit limit that belong to customer group retail customers. And as you can see, I've made changes to my credit limit and hold status. Now what I can do is I can save this as another view, and I can call this retail, active retail customers credit limit. Click save. And not only do I have this as a view when I come to all customers, but I can add this to a workspace. And to do that, we click the options ribbon at the top, and we now have this add to workspace. So if I click add to workspace, you can see I can pick any workspace, including your own custom workspaces. I'm going to add it to the customer invoicing workspace. And there are 3 options. I can add this as a tile, I can add it as a list, and I can add it as a link. And we'll do all 3 of those options. First of all, I'm going to keep it as a tile. I can hit configure. And at this point, I can leave the name as is, or I can change the name. So I could change this to be group 30, but I'll leave this as it is with active retail customers credit limit. Now, I'm deliberately going to leave the show number count as yes, because this is really useful information that can be presented. Now, in terms of the tile, this is how it will display. So do I want a 2x2 square tile? Do I want a 2x4 rectangle tile? Do I want a 1x2 rectangle tile? Or do I want a large 4x4 square tile? So I'm just going to leave it as just the square, smaller square tile. And you can see that it's going to be adding this to the customer invoicing under my view. Now, if I had multiple views, I could pick an additional view to apply that to. And I'm going to click Add to Workspace. Add to Workspace. We'll shortly navigate to the workspace, but I'm going to do the same thing again, but I'm going to apply this now not as a tile, but as a list. So when I hit Configure, the difference with a list is you can add additional fields that may not necessarily have been on the grid that you applied. So you can actually remove other fields. So maybe I don't want the telephone number. So I can remove that telephone number, and you can see I've got up to 8 columns, so I could apply different fields in this list view. I'm happy with that. In the drop down, you could give this a different name as well, but I'm going to leave it as is. And you can see you can do a simple or a more column up to 8 columns. I'm going to leave that as is and click Add to Workspace. The last option then is a link. So it's not commonly used, but is similar to a tile, is that I can make this a link and I can click Configure. I can give it a group. So this is, I'm going to call this Blevins links to customer queries. And I'm going to add that to my view as well. So let's go have a look at what that has done. So I've added a tile, I've added a list, and I've added a link. So back on Finance and Operations, under the Customer Invoicing workspace, it has defaulted to my view, and you can see that I have a tile which is called Active Retail Customers Credit Limit, and because I left the count on, I have 16 customers that meet that criteria. Now, the benefit of tiles is when you left click on them, it will take you directly to those queries that you've applied, and you can see it's active retail customers with the same sort. Now, as more customers meet that criteria, back in the workspace, you will see this number change. Looking at the lists then, if I scroll a little bit further down, you'll see I also have a list of active retail customers. So I don't necessarily have to move into the query. I can get some of that information directly here. And again, depending on how you set up that grid, you'll see that same information for those customers. Now, if I scroll down, you can see I also have links, and I created that group called Blevins Links to Customer Queries, very similar to a tile. If I scroll down again to the links, you can see I have active retail customers. If I left click on that link, you can see it will take me to the same query as the tile. So that's really powerful that you can add queries to not only the out-of-the-box workspaces, but you can add them to your own workspaces as well. Now, one thing I will show is how you can add these tiles to the workspace dashboard. So how you do that is you can right-click, personalize this particular tile. You can change the size of the tile. So maybe this 4x4 doesn't quite work for me. I can click on the 1x2 and you'll see that it now conforms to the other tiles that are on this grid. What you can also do is you can pin to dashboard. Now what that does is if I go back to the home page, you can now see that I have a direct link from the home page to that query. So under customer invoicing workspace, if I click on this active retail customers, not only can I see that there's 16, but you can left click on it and it will take you through to the query itself. So that's it for basic personalization. In the next session, we'll be covering the personalization tool, which gives you a lot more options when you're covering lots of personalizations. So to recap, we've covered a fair bit. We've covered how to add fields to grids and also hide fields. We've also shown how you can add fields to forms, fast tabs, also hiding and requiring fields and also skipping fields. We've also shown how to hide action menus as well as menu items, and we've also shown how to add tiles, lists, and links from queries into workspaces. Thank you.